Hello, Facebook. This is Tommy Valentine, Executive Director at Historic Athens. We want to thank you so much for taking some time today out of your busy schedules to tune in today for our 1 o'clock and final episode of This Moment in History, COVID-19 in Athens, Georgia. For the last 11 weeks, all the way back to April 13th, every weekday at 1 o'clock, we have been talking to different community leaders, entrepreneurs, clergy, restaurant owners, elected officials, all kinds of community organizers and leaders that help define Athens, Georgia as it currently exists here in the year 2020. Thanks to the candid answers, the interviews, and the soul-searching responses that we've received from our guests, we've had the opportunity to get a better understanding of how COVID-19 has affected the work underway here in Athens, Georgia. This is a difficult moment to document, and the only way we've been able to do so has been thanks to the generosity both of time and responses from the guests that we've interviewed. And so we really want to appreciate everyone that's been with us for this journey. I see a lot of folks are starting to chime in, and I just want to say that if you have any comments, questions, for the last time, I'll urge you, this is not just an episode to experience in a static way. You don't just have to sit back and watch. You can participate in the discussion we're having today. So if you have any comments, any questions, any words of encouragement, any thoughts, any feedback, go ahead and enter it under this live video, and we'll be able to include it in today's discussion. As I've said on previous episodes, that's especially important because today's discussion is one of 55 episodes that we are going to package and compile into a digital archive that we'll be submitting to our local libraries and research institutions. So you can not only be a part of that dialogue, you can help shape the dialogue to ensure the most accurate possible understanding of what it was like during these difficult times, especially during the early days of COVID-19, since we don't have any clear end in sight. All right, well, with that said, we want to thank this week's sponsors. We appreciate Bertus and Catherine Downs for supporting the program. Each week of the 11 weeks, we've had a different sponsor. We appreciate everyone's investment in making this happen. About halfway through today's episode, we'll tell you more about Historic Athens if this is your first time tuning in. If you're someone who loves history, loves Athens, Georgia, we hope that you can get more involved. But for now, without any further ado, we're going to bring on screen our guests, plural. So today we're going to be speaking to three people that should be well known to most of you, but we're going to take some time just to make sure we do a deeper dive into their backgrounds. We're going to be talking to three of the more exciting performers in Athens, but not just musicians, not just musical artists, but also people that are on the ground as part of the grassroots efforts to bring our city closer to a true vision of justice. So today we're going to be talking to Squale, Commissioner Mariah Parker, and Dope Knife. And so I really look forward to this conversation. We hope that you'll participate. Thanks to everyone for tuning in. And at this point, we'll go ahead and bring them on. So bear with me 1 second. All right, very good. All right, hello. How's it going over there?
Hey, what's up?
And I'll clarify in case our audience immediately started clutching pearls that so in addition to being committed to the work of justice and art, recording truth through music, you three also are roommates. Is that correct? Yes.
Yeah,
Yes,
we
sir.
live together.
Yes. I was just waiting for the comment section to explode about social distancing. I know that we've had a lot of those discussions. Certainly, we urge our audience to take every possible precaution to stay safe. But as much as we're excited to interview all three of you, we didn't insist that you break protocol. You're in the same house. So, all right. So great. So what I'd like to do is make sure we start by introducing each of our guests, and I'll just work from my screen left to right. So if you'll just take a moment, introduce yourself, talk about your background, and especially your relationship to Athens, Georgia. So Squale, can you start?
Yes, I'm Squale. I am from here. Well, I've been here for a long time, so I pretty much said it. I'm from here. I am a hip hop artist, a basketball coach, somewhat of an activist, and a step company owner as of current.
Absolutely. And you're a basketball coach where again?
I coach for the Highland Park Ravens. It's like recreational.
That's great. It's exciting. As long as you don't say Clark Central, we're good. My grudge against Clark Central has been one of the themes of this series, and I'm sure I've lost a lot of support from it. All right, up next, Commissioner Mariah Parker.
What's up, everybody? Commissioner Parker, representing District 2, the east side of Athens. Also a hip-hop artist. Squale was actually how I got into hip-hop, the hip-hop scene here in Athens. I'm also a co-host of a new podcast on iHeartRadio called Waiting on Reparations with Dope Knife here. I'm also a PhD candidate in language and literacy education at the University of Georgia, where I teach classes on writing pedagogy for elementary school teachers. And I've been very involved in organizing direct action and policy change around the recent George Floyd uprising.
Great. I see that in the comments section, I've already gotten a warning shot from a Clark Central grad. Easy, Tommy. So that's fair. Also, I just want to say that the idea of Mariah and Dope Knife's podcast, which is doing very well right now nationally, I just shared the link in the comments section to the Apple Store link for that. But we'll talk more about it a little bit later. But very excited that came up. All right, great. And then Dope Knife, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Dope Knife. I'm a rapper, producer, comic book artist and writer, and I direct music videos as well. I'm also a co-host of the Waiting on Reparations podcast with Mariah Parker. And yeah, I've been living in Athens for about 9 months now. I moved here in October, so it was just a few months before everything kind of went COVID. So
went COVID. We've made 55 episodes. It's the first time I've heard went COVID. So first of all, to the comments I see out there, I see a question from or comment from Ryan about the Waiting on Reparations pod is amazing, highly recommended. I see a question from Antonio about the recent activity on the 50-10 plan. So we're definitely going to get to the 50-10 a little later in the live cast once we've gone through some COVID issues, but that's coming. And Ryan, thanks for the encouragement to go subscribe and download the Reparations podcast. So, all right. So first of all, I would really appreciate if each of you would just agree individually to do one or two fewer things, because it's giving me a lot of a strong inferiority complex that each of you have too many slashes in your bio. You know, it's a good thing though. Highly accomplished, very busy. So I want to. Oh, great! And I see another comment from Jeremy when he's not hitting me up about Central stuff. I've enjoyed the last few years of Vic Chestnut Songwriter of the Year Award with Lingua, and getting to know a little Dope Knife. Looking forward to knowing a little bit about Squale. Great. So yeah, so to our viewers, I'm very excited. You know, as disappointing as it is that this series is ending, we wanted to go out on a good note. Each of our guests actually got to select their time slot throughout the series, and I was really excited that Mariah selected today. It means that we get to go out on a good note. I explained to our guests off air before we went on that my most difficult part today is going to be remaining a objective newscaster throughout this interview, but we're just going to do our best. So I asked about your relationship with Athens, Georgia, and I want to do a deeper dive into each of your background because I know it shapes the way you do the work you do today. And so, Squale, I'm going to jump over to you. You know, I'm thinking way back years ago now. I guess it was like 2016. We were having these meetings at Lay Park about community improvement and campaigning. And one of the things that you said that really stuck with me is that you said you grew up, you've lived in basically every key neighborhood in Athens, Georgia, that you've had this really broad experience of Athens, Georgia. It's not just an East Side perspective or a West Side perspective. How did growing up with that experience shape the work you're doing today?
That's a good question. Growing up here, I didn't realize, you know, the gentrification that was going on. When you're a kid, you're kind of like naive to the things that are happening around you. But I will say that I know for a fact I didn't have resources. I didn't have equal opportunity, and I didn't have chances to better myself being a child of color, pretty much. So that's why now when I came back from college, I wanted to invest my time and energy into kids. But I mean, the community, man, the places where I've lived, they're still the same. After 20 plus years, there's no renovations, there's no remodeling. Some of them don't even have playgrounds. Some of them don't have wash and dryer hookup. You know, it's mildew, there's infestation. This stuff was still like that when I was growing up. And it's kind of sad. So me being a child in that environment, I didn't have any expressive outlets to kind of let off that steam and stuff like that. So now that's what made me want to create my expressive outlets for the kids.
Right.
At least kind of take them away from some of the stress that you deal with in the poverty-filled neighborhoods and communities.
Thanks for sharing that. Mariah, in her introduction, talked about how you helped her start to get involved. Can you talk a little bit about your role? I know that, Squale, we all feel like young people until someone points out that maybe we're not as young as we used to be.
I know, right?
But so you do work. Mentorship is a big part of your work.
Yeah.
Community connections are a big part of your work. Empowering people is a big part of your work. Can you talk about where those values come from and why that's such a priority to you?
It's just how I was raised. My mom, she was in and out of my life, but when she was in, she always instilled those type of principles in me to give back, never to judge people based on where they're from or the color of their skin. She always just taught me to just treat people like I wanted to be treated.
Right.
We used to, as kids, we used to go in the neighborhood and just kind of pick up trash. And I used to go to my neighbor's house and take her trash out. And she was older. Sometimes I would go to clean her house and stuff like that, do things that she couldn't do. So since a kid, that stuff has kind of just been in me anyway. So when I got older, it wasn't really nothing forceful. Community service is something I feel like is huge and something that I feel like we as hip hop artists could do and should do more of.
Yeah.
So now I feel like I wanted to be on the forefront of it all, just giving back. I've been blessed to have opportunities to travel and just deal with a lot of different things in my lifetime. So now that I'm back, the main thing that I wanted to do is just kind of pour it back into the community.
Thanks for sharing that. So, Mariah, you are now easily one of the most recognizable elected officials that Athens has had in a very long time. You're not. Yeah. You're not from Athens originally, but clearly you have planted your flag here and decided to make your stand here. Can we start by just asking about what was it that made you decide that Athens was that place for you? Especially District 2. What made you decide that this was where you were going to do your work?
Yeah, so I mean, when I was growing up, I bounced back and forth between parental households a lot. I ended up moving to, moving away for college and had lived away from my extended family throughout growing up in Louisville, Kentucky. And so I had a somewhat fractured sense of home, just given my upbringing and given that distance from my extended family and the moving around that I did, post moving out of my parents' home. And so Athens was the first place where I really felt like I was at home, really ever in my life, after spending a couple of years here. And I came to discover through knowing people like Squale and you, Tommy, and in living here in District 2, getting to know my neighbors, getting to know the folks that frequent the homeless day center down the street or stay the night at Bigger Vision. And the rock band, the guy in the rock band that has their guitar practice or whatever every Sunday night.
Right.
Seeing all these really fertile ingredients for something really good here. Athens has a lot of problems, and once you live here for a while, you get past the glitz of the music scene and going out downtown and come to know the people and the struggles that are very real here. But I feel like we have a lot of the makings to be a leader across the country for modeling really bold transformative change for other cities and counties everywhere. If we just combine these ingredients in a way that pushes that forward, like we can cook up something really good, and that's like not something I felt anywhere else that I've lived before. And so I've always felt like, if you see a need for justice, you can't wait for somebody to come along. You got to put your cape on and jump in there yourself. And so I just kind of started doing that in the place that that's where I found home.
Dope Knife. So you're no stranger to Historic Athens. A lot of our audience, last year we launched Historic Athens Porch Fest, which was one of the larger events we were involved in the last few years. For an event that included 70 plus concerts, your event was probably the most talked about performance. So I still remember you freestyling about Superman and Taco Bell and everything else like that.
We had the rap battle about whether or not
hot dog is a sandwich. Yeah. Yes. How could anyone forget? Right. And so, great. I just saw Marcus Lawrence just said this is dope. Just started watch party. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. So what I wanted to ask about is, so at the same time I was learning to be a community organizer, I was learning to freestyle, and it reshapes your brain in a certain way to be able to do that, to want to do that, to crave to do that. You also explained the other areas of art that you do. So you're a comic artist, you direct, you're someone that is also concerned with social justice. Can you, for our viewers, explain the relationship between freestyling and the rest of your work, and maybe tell us a little bit about how your brain works?
I want to know this. I want to know this.
I mean, it's like as far as freestyling goes, I define it as the ability to think on your feet and to like problem solve as quickly and as efficiently as you can. You're not always getting it perfect every time, but I kind of apply that philosophy towards my art and kind of life generally, which is like, it comes at you fast and you have to make the best with what you're given. And you have to hope that the overall product of what you're doing is good, as opposed to like worrying about each individual line and each individual part that makes it up. I have to think of the greater good of things like that. So, I mean, with that, when it comes to drawing comic books, or making beats or making songs, or even, working on the show, doing the podcast is like a new experience for me. And I'm the producer of it, so I have to cut it together and edit together. But being able to look at the grand scheme of things and know where you should invest your energy and your attention, and where you kind of just have to let things play out the way they're going to play out. And that's how I approach things. So
that's great.
As far as getting good at it, I mean, these days, what's good? It's all subjective, right?
Here's what I'll say about good.
It's practice. It's a lot. A lot of practice.
So I mean, I'm talking to 3 MCs here. So this is a very in the weeds question that even with as many years as I was an MC, I can barely articulate. But there are phases when you're learning to freestyle, and one of the first phases is just being able to do it at all. Then the second phase,
phase is when you're terrible.
You're garbage. Then there's the second phase where you're good enough to impress other people, and maybe other folks don't notice the same stumbles you're focusing on. But then there's the third phase, which I don't even know if it's so much as a phase as a level that you manage, a pocket you get in every now and then if you're lucky. But it's where you're not only saying funny or accurate or meaningful things, you're connecting to a deeper level of who you are, and it's that coming out. It's not just a funny character that happens to be freestyling, it's you.
Around my way, we used to call that blacking out. It's like when you're freestyling, it's like
that's right, when you're blacking out.
Like it's almost to the point where you're not even really rapping anymore.
You don't even know what's going on anymore.
You're not even really aware of what's happening. And it's like, you learn about it after the fact, where people were like, "Oh man, that was crazy."
Right.
You're like, "Oh, was it? Did you know like
Right,
that?"
right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's this idea that I think when you really hit that level, when you really hit that level, sometimes you are laughing at the things that are coming out of your mouth because you're hearing them for the first time too.
You're like, I thought of that.
Yeah.
I think I mean, the closest I imagine is what stand-up comedians feel.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes when you're seeing like a stand-up comedian and they tell a joke and then they kind of laugh at it themselves, it's kind of like that sort of thing where you're like, "Oh, that was."
Yeah. So well, and that's what one of the things that's the reason why I ask about the connectivity between that and the other part of your art is it is this idea of trying to bring an inner truth out. Which is also, as we continue this discussion today, where we're talking about COVID and tough and difficult circumstances and policing and all these other topics, it's back to that theme of trying to drive for some deeper truth. So, I'm going to bring a few of the comments out here. So, Marcus, thank you. Marcus said, following Tommy since Cedar Shoals. What up, Jags? Go Jaguars. Jeremy's trying to start problems here. Can we have a freestyle off between Tommy and Guest for the Swan Song episode?
Let's do it.
I would immediately lose. Marcus gave an affirmative answer to the answer about freestyling. Mary Margaret Cozart wants to know where they can find your comics. So you want to answer that?
When it comes out.
Tommy's seen a little bit of the.
They're very, very impressive. Very impressive.
Tommy's seen a little bit of it. It's been a work in progress. I did a couple other ones, but it was almost 10 years ago. This is kind of my magnum opus. I have a little bit of a platform, so now I feel it's kind of the time for me to put my all into like a project. So it's already been drawn. I've already drawn it all, and right now it's being colored. So it's gonna be coming out soon. I'll be making a big deal of it. I'm gonna be doing a musical score for it, and I'm also gonna be producing a soundtrack that'll have some of your favorite.
See, this is what I'm talking about with all the slashes. There's too many slashes. It's hey, I put out a comic book. Yeah, but did you release a soundtrack for it? All right. Lots of other folks trying to start trouble in the comment section, which I appreciate.
I heard that you were really good.
I was at one point. All right. So Kelly Bivens, my teenage son is taking your class, Mariah, with Ruth on art and current issues right now. Is loving it. Thank you for investing in our young people. Alex Sam says blacking out and freestyling sounds a little like being in the zone in sports. That is exactly what it's like.
Wait, hold on. Can I elaborate on that? That's exactly what it's like. When you're watching, I'm a huge basketball fan, but when you're watching like Carmelo Anthony or LeBron or somebody and they score like 50 or 60 points and they interview them afterwards and it's like, oh, it was just like an ocean.
Right.
Like, at least me personally, I don't want to speak for everybody, but I get to a certain point that whoever was there at the Porch Fest, you guys witnessed a moment in it where it's like, I can almost see, it's almost like someone has a cue card in my brain and they're holding up the words and they're just coming up.
Oh, you're right. Yeah. It is. It's like tapping into this thing. So, I do have one question here and then we're going to address it back to the interview. And Marcus, I appreciate the deep dive cut here. And Mary Margaret, just so you know, Dope Knife said that she's looking forward to it, to the comics. I have a question here from Mary Helen Pierce. What class is Mariah teaching? Mariah, can you talk about that?
Yeah, and so this is actually a great transition to talking a little bit about like adapting to life under COVID.
Please.
Because every summer I've participated in what they used to call Camp Dive, which was like a youth participatory action course where young people, middle schoolers, high schoolers would be partnered with graduate students at the University of Georgia to work on art projects that would address issues of social justice or social change. So kind of taking a critical perspective to works of art at the Georgia Museum, or like one year I had us do an analysis of Childish Gambino's This Is America, to look at how we can use these resources to communicate our own ideas about what the world should be like. So this summer, unfortunately, because of COVID, we've had to try to transition that work online. So we meet weekly on Zoom. I've, given workshops about hip hop and illustrated examples of how to use hip hop for social change to address issues like general strikes or the 2020 election or, political organizing or, COVID. So that's a lot of the work. We also partnered with someone from the Georgia Museum of Art who does a lot of work around visual art, trying to give people access to various tools creatively to address social issues going on. And so that's the course that I co-teach right now at the
Excellent. Thanks for sharing that. So lots of great comments in the comment section. I do see one about Marcus just hit me with like a Nardwar level comment about Mr. Tay-Tay's class, which is where we used to freestyle when we were in high school. But and I also like Ryan's suggestion of some watch parties when NBA comes back. Maybe we can make that happen through this platform. But I want to ask you all each to describe the effect that COVID-19 has had on the work you're doing. We've established by now that you're all doing a lot. And some of the things you're doing are, I used to call it blinking cursor syndrome. The cursors don't really blink like they used to, but in many ways, whether you're talking about social justice, you know what I'm talking about? Like when you're about to type something. All right. On Microsoft Word back in the day, when you would have to sit down and write a paper, you'd have that cursor, right? That little thing, and it would blink. And sometimes I would get so stuck wanting to write the perfect first sentence that it would take me like an hour just to get started, because you've got to turn that blank page into a full page. And I think with each of the things y'all are doing, whether it's Squale's step team, whether it's the comics we're talking about, whether it's the classes that are being taught, or whether it's trying to produce justice at a level that has never existed, some people would have blinking cursor syndrome. They're staring at a void that they're trying to fill. That's hard enough to do in everyday circumstances, but in the middle of a pandemic, it can be that much more difficult, as we've seen. So can I start once again with Squale? Squale, from early March, when this started to hit Athens to now, can you walk us through how COVID-19 has affected the way you do work here in Athens?
My day job, I lost because of COVID, and I haven't worked there since. But so my financial position was compromised. But I never look at COVID like a bad thing, because it kind of forced me into getting my company off the ground. Like it was kind of something I had in the works, but I wasn't really putting a lot into it. And then once I lost my job, it was like, all right, Squale, what now? So I ended up, getting LLC'd and going through the process. It kind of like motivated me into just getting it all together. So I got LLC in March, and in June I have my own building pretty much. The only way that it's kind of affected that, I can't have a lot of kids in my space. So it kind of affects the way I can recruit and the way that we do things with that. And other than that though, it hasn't been that bad for me.
That's great. Thanks for sharing. And that's a good silver lining for sure. Yeah. Mariah, I want to spend some time with you because one of the things we've talked about with several of our guests is it's one thing to have to deal with this for yourself, lost wages, learning new terms and health procedures. That's something that everyone's had to go through. What our local elected officials also had to go through on top of that was not only deciding how they were going to navigate things in their household, but how other households should navigate this. And so I want to make sure we spend some time on that. So can you just walk us through once again? I mean, coronavirus, COVID-19 started popping up in the newspapers in some ways in January, almost like any good zombie movie. You start to see those like stray newscasts, the things that the main characters are ignoring. And then it started building its critical mass. And then all of a sudden March was here, and really going into that week of spring break, that Friday the 13th, everything started happening at once. It felt like all these things were getting canceled. And the city of Athens looked towards the mayor and commission for what was next. Can you talk about those early days of COVID-19 and what it felt like to be part of the mayor and commission at that time?
Yeah, I mean, and so personally for me, like when everything started to go down in Athens, I had just come back from canvassing for Bernie Sanders in South Carolina. and been there the night of his epic loss. Like I got in a car accident and found out my mom was in the hospital the same day, that like whispers of like shelter in place started to go out in, the communities, Russell Edwards pushing forward shelter in place order. And like it kind of like hitting me late of just like hearing all these whispers in the news nationally and like looking at some of the epidemiological trends, but then suddenly hitting one day like, oh snap, no, like this is here now, like this, like we got to take action now to protect our community. And so it was really surreal at first, definitely. It felt definitely like a zombie movie where it's like, you don't really, like, you hear sirens and you don't know where they're coming from. And you see a car crash and like burst into flames and you don't understand why. It definitely felt like that in the early days of legislating around that, trying to figure out what was the best way to keep our community safe. And then I was also dealing with, as a teacher at the University of Georgia, suddenly my classes were just all online. And then all of my, I used to tour really frequently and all my engagements got canceled. I was traveling frequently to colleges to speak to students about my personal journey into electoral politics. All of that was over. And so it definitely, I had to shift really quickly into like, not only thinking about policy, but thinking about mutual aid in our community. The number of people that were on the brink of homelessness or food insecurity, or who were losing jobs, or because they lost jobs, no longer had access to childcare, transportation, and figuring out how to facilitate people getting their basic needs met as not just an elected official, but someone like a community member that cares deeply about my community, and as an organizer that cares deeply about my community. And so participating in food drives, dropping off food at the Homeless Day Center, helping connect people to like Mutual Aid Athens and like EADC's Emergency Relief Fund and things like that, raising money for EADC, started to consume my attention a lot more than like it had previously, just because the need escalated so quickly, given the shelter in place and the mass closings of establishments that we saw, the mass layoffs that we saw.
Did you find yourself, as someone who travels a lot, did you find yourself having withdrawal? I know travel can be a burden.
But it's interesting that he's shaking his head like, yeah, I actually had not prioritized like self-care at, like at the expense of my wellness. Like I prioritized my career and like I found it really exciting to be traveling a lot and like was really grateful for the opportunities to speak to college students all around the country. But I was like working every day. I would travel, I'd get on a plane and fly to California or something, and then fly back on Monday and be back at work. And I thought of it as like, oh, these are little vacations, but it was work all the time. And so I've actually done a lot of work around just like personal wellness during this time, now that I am here all the time, that I think has been really important. And so that was actually like a surprising, like I needed someone to put the pause on my life. And it's unfortunate that it had to be COVID, but it had to happen. So that I've actually learned a lot through that, even if, it's in other ways kind of unfortunate.
One other key event in your life that took place, and I know we're going to talk more about the protests and the Black Lives Matter movement, the police discussion that we've had in a moment. But one other event was an electoral event. So you had won a special election. Harry Sims had run for mayor, opening up his seat. You had won, and therefore you had taken over the remainder of his term, about 2 years. But you were also preparing for the possibility of having to run again to earn your 4-year seat. Can you talk a little bit about, there's the folks that haven't run for office don't know the whole pressure of, is someone else going to qualify? What's going on? Amidst all the other noise, how much bandwidth did all the idea of another campaign take up?
The idea of having to mount another campaign, like I felt confident we could pull it off even stronger than last time if it came to that. But with teaching at the university and actually legislating and, doing, speaking to college students and stuff like that, it wasn't something I looked forward to. And so I guess the week of qualifying, the week that I was going to find out if someone else was going to be on the ballot, was also pretty much the week before COVID hit. Yeah. And so, it was a massive relief to know that I could just focus on legislating and focus on constituent services and just focus on the actual work of serving the community rather than, pouring money and time into like another campaign. Right. But it's really interesting to see how other campaigns for commission have played out under COVID, having been close to a number of candidates that were running right now.
Well, and that's I guess one thing I wanted to just throw out there, and then Dope Knife, we have a series of questions for you, but you know, you famously won your first campaign by fewer than 20 votes, which for anyone that has ever done grassroots campaigning, that makes you thankful for every hour, every minute, every volunteer, every single day you felt like staying inside. When you did win your campaign by fewer than 20 votes, there was some talk of, oh, well, certainly she'll be challenged the next time. You know, there are folks realizing there might be this opening. When ultimately the people of your district decided not to have a challenger, when ultimately you did run unopposed and secured your second term this year, 4 years, what was your emotional reaction to that, to finding out that you weren't going to have a challenger?
I mean, I wasn't entirely surprised. I know off the strength of like the commitments I had made early in my tenure to racial and economic justice and some of the national attention that was brought to Athens and to my work from that. I had built a really strong following and made a number of like legislative victories that, you know, for the community that I was really proud of. And I think given all of that work, I had changed my position from like an outsider who barely scraped by to get in to like a very serious contender with a very like strong army of folks behind me, both folks that had not previously supported me before and now did, as well as folks that have been brought into the political process who weren't previously, you know, on my team and like, you know, on my side. So yeah, I wasn't terribly surprised that no one chose to run against me, even though I don't know. Is that weird to say? I don't know.
No, I mean, you're saying you approached the job in a way to ensure that outcome, and so that was the outcome you got. So, all right, Mac, Dope Knife. So you, if I remember correctly, you actually completed your move during this period of time. That this is the last few months as you've settled into Athens have been some of the craziest times to come to Athens. Can you talk about March to now, how that's worked out?
I mean, I have some of the same parallels with what Squale and Mariah were saying, just in terms of like, I used to do a lot of live shows as well. That was kind of my livelihood. So that's dried up. I had a bunch of grandiose plans for like music releases and things like that. That's kind of been put on pause. I mean, I've still been releasing music, but I don't know. I went through stages of dealing with it. When it first hit initially, I got really depressed and really felt inadequate in the moment. Just because, unlike the two of them, I'm like an artist. That's my main thing. Whatever work I do in terms of the things that I'm concerned with, it either gets accomplished through the different art that I'm creating, or it doesn't. You know, like I'm either changing hearts and minds through my music, or I'm not. But that's like my contribution. So in that moment of, oh man, there's a global pandemic going on, people are losing their jobs, we're about to enter a recession probably. I felt like there was no need for what I had to offer. You know, there was a good 2 months of feeling that way. So I wasn't writing, I wasn't doing it. I was just literally just sitting down, eating and existing and trying not to get sick. You know, it's like that was it. So, but to be honest with you, it might sound kind of like cheesy, but I think the situation with George Floyd kind of kicked me out of that funk to now I've been going back and listening to my old music, and it's been like, oh wow, I kind of spent the last decade kind of predicting the situation that we're going to be in. So maybe I could like bring that insight even further. And it just all being a coincidence that we have the podcast and it's another outlet for me to do that. Yeah, it's kind of worked out. I feel a bit more artistically invigorated in the moment now because, you know, before it felt like I was kind of shot. Just personally, it felt like with with the style of music that I was making, it felt that I was kind of like shouting into the wind.
Yeah.
And now it more feels like when I really get back on it, like when I'm done with focusing on the comic book and I really get back into music,
Yeah.
it feels like I'll have a few more people kind of, paying attention and wanting to hear what I might have to say.
Yeah.
What up,
Yeah.
Wes? I see you.
Hi, Wes. So
Wes,
okay, we're gonna Wes out there answering questions for people. I appreciate that. I did want to say just one piece of positive feedback. So we got Melody saying thanks for what you all are doing. So I need to quickly thank our annual sponsors. It'll take about 60 seconds. When we get back, what we're going to do is we do have 3 closing questions we close out every interview with. We're going to make sure to take our time to do that with these folks, even if that runs us about 5 minutes over. But I really feel we need to open up the floor to the broader discussion that that Dope Knife just referred to. This idea of the national moment of clarity. There's a lot of other folks now screaming into the wind too, and so I want to make sure we tap into that. So everybody, stay with us. Give us 60 seconds, and we're going to come right back to the conversation. So one moment. All right. So very quickly, what I want to show is the people you see on screen here. These are our annual sponsors. Without their help, we would not still be open. COVID might have taken us out after 52 years, but thanks to their support, we are able to keep our lights on, we're able to keep our team moving, and we're able to continue our 52-year-old 501c3 mission of celebrating and conserving community heritage in Athens, Georgia. As hopefully you've all noticed, in recent years, we've looked to double down on ensuring, as Fred Smith says, that we're telling the whole story. And that's what part of this oral history was about. If you wish to support that mission and our increased focus on equity, please consider becoming a member or a sponsor. Membership begins at only $5 a month. You can do it at historicathens.com right now, and it makes a big difference in our ability to do the work that you see that we're doing. If you're looking for a quick and easy way to support us, we just partnered with Satisfactory Printing, as you see on screen, to offer some all-new limited edition shirts designed by local artists, printed by a local print shop, and you can find them there celebrating the historic designs you can see on screen. Tonight at 6 o'clock, you can tune in for the last of our 51st Annual Historic Athens Preservation Award episodes. Tonight, we're going to be interviewing the folks from W&A Engineering, celebrating the lifetime achievements of Nancy Lukashevitz, and presenting this year's Historic Athens President's Award in memory of Commissioner Jerry Neesmith and his work on Beach Haven and the Athens Welcome Center. And so we'll be looking to do that. As we said, today is the last of 55 episodes. If you look on screen right now, you can see the guest list that we had. If you want to see past episodes, just go to the video section of our Facebook page. And we'd love to have you check those past episodes out. There's some really good ones in there. All right. So with that said, we're going to go ahead and return to our guests here in just a moment. All right, here we go. One sec. All right, great. Hi. Hello. All right, there we go. So, all right. So, I want to take this turn here that the conversation just kind of naturally headed in. So, to editorialize for a moment, and we've heard this from a lot of our guests, this is probably the consensus view. So in March, this event of historic proportions happens in all of our lives, the kind of thing that we're used to reading about in history books. And for just a moment, everyone in the United States is being told, whether or not it's being heard or adhered to, but being told to go inside. I mean, I still have my stay-at-home sign in my yard that, Mariah, you went around planting for anybody who requested. We were told to stay home, cancel events, flatten the curve.
Keep it.
Yes.
Yeah, keep that curve flat.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden we had to do things that we had, once again, only seen in history books. We had to wear masks. We had to learn terms we hadn't learned. We had to consider our duty to fellow citizens around us, which is not something that everyone really considers. And then in that quiet, in that collective moment of stepping back and pressing pause and being glued to our machines, this long cresting wave of understanding about racial justice, about police brutality hit. And these discussions that have existed on the periphery suddenly came to the forefront. And these are things that, I mean, if somebody's watching this 100 years from now, these weren't the first times that these discussions have been had. But perhaps my favorite description of the protests we've seen, I've heard people refer to them as the fed up protests, that folks just were fed up with waiting around any further. And so now we're having this discussion, the same discussion, Mac, that Dope Knife referenced earlier. So can I ask you, just as you did with COVID-19, can I ask, I'd like to go to each one of you and talk about, when we consider the idea of racial and social justice, what the last few months have been like and what impact it's had on you. So I'm going to kind of reverse the order here, so I'm not just picking on the same people every time. Mac, could we start with you, since you opened us up to that conversation, what the last few months have been like in your eyes?
I mean, it feels like one of those moments where you're always going to remember where you were and what you were doing for the rest of your life. It feels like the begin, I'm 36,
Mm-hmm.
and it feels like I don't consider myself to be like old, but it already feels like there've been so many of those moments that have been kind of like a reset to what life is like after that moment. There's life before this moment. There's life before 9/11, and there's life after 9/11.
Right.
And this is one of those moments where we're living in, which is like, I've been telling this to a lot of my friends and just people I know. Whatever you were doing before March 10th, that was before March 10th. Like, we're in a whole new world now, a completely new time. And I think that this heightened focus on social justice and racial equality, I think it's a product of that. It's like, this is going to be the new normal. I think if we can get over this hurdle and like actually make some real change, I think people are going to be in a state where it's like, all right, and what's the next thing that we have to solve now? What's the next problem to solve? I just think that's where people are now. I think the national zeitgeist is geared around like actually making a equal and fair society now. So it's exciting times. At the same time, I would just like caution not to burst the bubble. Is COVID? Yeah, I grew up overseas. I'm half African. I'm half Liberian, so I just can't help but look at things in these ways. But COVID has yet to really impact the third world the way that it's going to. And when it does, it's going to start a cascade of international events that's a whole nother bed of worms. So just from that perspective, we need to hurry up. Whatever consensus we're trying to get to in the States, we need to put the gas on it, because we're probably going to have to like put our attention, a bit more internationally.
Yeah.
Soon.
So I want to say exactly what you just said. Also, I see Montu saying he just showed up late. Montu, it can't be late if you just showed up. The party doesn't start till Montu's here. If you want to see our previous episode with Montu, go back into the videos archives. It was one of our favorites. Mariah, I want to toss to you here and transition from something that Dope Knife just said. So there's been a lot of talk that COVID has really clarified for people some of the gaps in our society, some of the obstacles in our society that have prevented people. I know Squale used the word opportunity earlier, prevented people from having fair opportunities. There's a lot of hope in the air that I hear that, okay, this is our moment of reckoning. Now that those things are stripped back, we're going to dive into them. The historian in me, and not that I'm a classically trained historian, but the person who loves history in me says, well, yeah, but the 1918 flu happened in the middle of Jim Crow, and that didn't solve Jim Crow. You had things going on in an overlapping manner. you're someone who's engaged not just in hoping, but trying to change. Earlier, you heard the question about 5010. We know that you yourself endured COVID-19. You're taking a lot of this on yourself. How does that affect your sense of outlook or hope for what comes next?
I mean, I definitely think it creates an incredible amount of pressure. People are looking for answers right now, and so they like grieve and they have this heartbreak and this outrage, and they're inundated with these images from across the country of continued police brutality. In addition to the ways the pandemic has exposed the threadbare fabric of our social safety net, and radicalized a lot of people in our calls for cancellation of rent, questioning whether landlords are necessary, the need for UBI, these things that people maybe weren't paying attention to before, we now realize how desperately are needed. And I think that has given rise to people kind of being at a breaking point and leading to this unrest nationally. But in that unrest, people are looking for answers. They see the petitions online, they see the bail funds, they hear about the direct action going on, but linking that to specific policy asks that are attuned to the context, that are attuned to what's politically feasible within their city or their county, requiring relationships with their elected officials and helping build that bridge, I think is somewhere that I've tried to step in as much as possible in organizing, mass mobilizations of people and doing mass political education. But it's a lot of pressure because, I don't have all the answers. I've always admitted that my work is wholly collaborative. I don't come up with any good ideas. I get good ideas from people in the community who, want to see things change and actually listening to people. And so, that's how the plan for 5010 came about. That's how a lot of other pieces of legislation like the Lindentown resolution have come forward. And that's how I'll continue to operate. It's just now that I've kind of pushed the conversation around defunding the police as far as we can go in a certain direction here in Athens, kind of taking a step back and doing some listening to figure out what the next steps are rather than weighing myself down with self-expectations of always having all the answers.
Yeah. I'm by the way, I know that we're running low on time. I want to be respectful of your schedules, but there are just some additional questions I feel like I need to ask. So I hope I can have y'all for just a little bit longer. Mariah, just as a follow-up question. So this week, the Mayor and Commission passed its budget. The 5010 plan, which was something that you've been advocating with a variety of methods and the community had been advocating for, ultimately did not enter that budget in the form that you had wanted. But we've seen a wave of press in the last 24 hours that has pointed out a few of the key changes to that budget that were requested as part of the 5010 plan. Can you outline some of those changes that ended up going into the budget, and then maybe share your perspective on what it feels like to only get a smaller portion of the justice you were seeking?
Yeah, I mean, I am very proud of the fact that we won races for public defenders so that people's constitutionally protected right to legal counsel will be steadfastly, administered. The fact that a second social worker in the public defender's office is going to bring so much help to people that do seek their legal counsel and need access to resources in order to avoid recidivism or, to faithfully enact their defense plan. The fact that we brought our 911 service, EMS dispatch service in-house is literally going to save lives in Athens. And that's also amazing. We've got this task force, and I saw someone in the comments asking about what next steps are. So I'll kind of address that too. So we approved $350,000 to look at how we can reimagine public safety in Athens. And there's still a lot of opportunity to make sure that we have abolitionist voices on that body that will push the direction in the way that the public, through thousands of emails we received and hundreds of postcards and dozens, if not hundreds of phone calls, and thousands of people marching in the street demonstrated that we want in this community, whether or not our elected representatives are going to hear them out and actually serve their interests. Yeah. So there's a lot of work to be done around that still, a lot of hope there as well. So there's a lot to be thankful for in the budget, a lot of work to be done in subsequent budgets. I'm still very hopeful that with some participatory budgeting, as the data bears out that divesting from policing and investing in community is highly popular in this community. We can pass something similar to 50-10 in the next budget, and I will be pushing for something similar to that once I receive that community input. So I'm really hopeful about the work to come and excited for it.
Yeah, thank you. Squale, so in all that you do, you've also seen the effects of the last few months, not just COVID, but talking about this discussion about restorative justice, racial justice, equity. These haven't, for folks that are outside that maybe haven't been to a protest before, that are only used to experiencing it through photos. Sometimes it's easy to underestimate the trauma involved in this kind of work, the weight it places on people's shoulders to be out on the front lines trying to advocate for justice. Can you talk a little bit about how you've shouldered that weight and what the last few months have been like for you?
It's been kind of rough. I myself have been a victim to police brutality most of my life. I had a conversation with some of the guys that I worked with the other day. It was 10 of us in a circle, and I had a basketball, and I was asking them questions and tossing the basketball to them. Once you catch the basketball, they had to answer the question. Mm-hmm. So I asked my team, how does it feel to be Black? And I passed them the basketball. A 13-year-old boy answered, it feels bad because police hate me. Mm. A 13-year-old boy answered that and said that to me. So my job there was to educate him on not the fact that you could be hated, or maybe that you're not even hated, it's just you're misunderstood. And I had to educate him on the law, and I had to educate him on to how he needs to love himself and the skin that he is in, and how he doesn't need to add fuel to the fire by hating people for their color. So I've just been trying to just be an advocate for the children, specifically because that's what I do. I'm just teaching them how to carry themselves and teaching them how to react to situations like that, teaching them what the protests are about. And I've been doing the same with parents, sitting in lunches and dinners with parents, just kind of telling them, what we want to do with the kids and how we want to move forward in these times. And it's been kind of emotional. When he said that, I got choked up. Because when I was 13, I felt the same way. And now I'm 29 and I still feel the same way. So that's pretty much what I've been doing, is just trying to just keep the kids involved and make sure that they're knowledgeable about, what's going on, and teaching them how they can be effective in the community as well.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
I see a few follow-up questions in the comments. We're going to address these, and then we will go into the closing questions that I'm going to ask of each of you. Antonio just wanted to clarify. So the $350K, Mariah, for the studying police services or community services, is that just for this year's budget, or is that a long-term?
1 year of the study.
Okay, very good. Thank you. And then Lynn, and also an important moment that's happening here is the decision has been made to move for what is now the third time in our history, a Confederate memorial that has long stood near the arch, right in between UGA and at the intersection, and symbolically at the intersection of Athens and UGA, the Venn diagram has been at the crosswalk, a Confederate memorial. That's going to be moved. Our public square is being rethought. I see Dan Delamater saying, Squale, keep investing in kids. Good work. Thank you, Dan. Not just Mariah in this one. I know Mariah is the one with the most elected power to answer the following question, but a lot of this discussion has been about the public square. What we know about Confederate memorials, especially the Lost Cause era, was that they were erected entirely to send a signal to African Americans in our community that they were not welcome, that they were not powerful. And that's a message that has been reified for decades, for centuries, in various ways. in addition to the national discussion about policing, we're also seeing a national discussion about the traditions and infrastructure that we have in our society, whether it's what our college buildings are named, whether it's what individuals from the past we not only remember, but that we celebrate, what statues should remain. So Lynn's question here, do you have any ideas on how we can reimagine the Athens public space? She gave the Confederate Monument as one example, but I'm curious for you three, as African-American community leaders, what you think about how the public space needs to be reimagined.
Take that first, just
yeah, please go for it.
So I mean, I think there's a lot of like infrastructure kind of improvements we can make in terms of park benches, of public art, of closing off, more streets to have things like parklets that can make public space inviting. But we also need to socialize ourselves to not see poverty as a crime, and also decriminalize poverty. Because right now you have people sitting on park benches and no one else wants to come sit on that park bench next to them because they look like they might have slept there that night before. And we have, folks panhandling in front of stores because they don't have a place to, a place to work, or a roof over their heads. And right now they're being criminalized. And that kind of feeds into our own psychology of how we view public space. We see it as only legitimate if you're going into a store to buy a sandwich or going into a bar to buy a beer. But if you're hanging out somewhere like the Iron Triangle, having a beer in the parking lot with some friends, maybe listening to some music, or whatever, that's not okay because you're not partaking in a, transaction. You're not participating in a business, and suddenly it's not okay for you to occupy that particular kind of public space. And so I think that we as a community need to rethink our, not just, let's make public space better by making it look nicer, but also retraining ourselves to think about who deserves to be in public spaces in a different way, so that Black people don't get profiled for hanging out somewhere that seems like they're not supposed to, or might be up to something suspicious just because they're sitting on a park bench, because they might be drinking a 40 in a parking lot.
So Mariah, follow-up question to this, and being cognizant of time, what are we going to have to do, not just society broadly, but in Athens, Georgia, to live in an era where, if I go running right now and I go on millage, and it's not just private property, it's not that simple. If I go running on millage, I can go see a bunch of guys, shirtless guys that are drinking beer on the grass.
They're on the porch.
And they're on the porch, that are out there, but I'm saying drinking right by the sidewalk, and it's a fun, those guys are growing up, good for them vibe. Whereas if I go down to Triangle Plaza and I see African-American people that fit the same description, that we view that as criminals and threatening, and what kind of changes are we going to have infrastructurally, legislatively, or otherwise in Athens for that perspective to shift?
Yeah, I think it, fiscally, it involves our economic development strategy, focusing more on cooperative development, focusing on building strong unions in Athens as cultural institutions that help people build power, so that if they want to go be legitimately drinking at a sports bar or something, people have the money to do that and have the social capital to be welcome in those places. I think it's really important, as well as in our schools, as in terms of educating folks on acceptance and not just acceptance, but solidarity with marginalized people, so that when you see somebody who looks different than you and looks like maybe they didn't shower today, you don't have a knee-jerk reaction of do I need to call the cops, or why are they here? They're not supposed to be here. So I think those are two places that, in the way that we empower people economically, the way we teach our kids, and and on a personal level, being critical of our own perceptions and our own reactions to situations.
And that's what I was going to say.
Yeah, please.
I think the change, as far as how you perceive someone, it starts on the inside. There's a personal battle that you have to have with yourself that teaches you not to judge someone based on how they look.
Right.
Because most of the time that's something that's been taught to you since you were a child. Right. You have to unteach yourself on how to not perceive people based on how they look, or based on what they have, or based on what they own. I think that starts personally. And
Right.
when people start to hold themselves accountable for those things and acknowledging that those things are issues and they start to tackle that personally,
Right.
that can kind of like drive, the force forward.
Right.
Because a lot of times the stuff that we do think of people is because we pretty much got taught a whole
Right.
lot. And then there's propaganda, there's all this media stuff. So the perception that we have of each other is all kind of like programmed out there.
Right.
We have to have that personal fight with ourselves. And I think that will like help, the force and the feeling.
Yep.
And, I think athletes don't have enough shelters. There's a huge homeless community here. And it's because they really ain't got nowhere to go. You got a couple shelters, but some of them, they have criteria for you to get in them. Some of them are only open for a couple of hours. There's not like a place, like a real homeless place for these people to go. And
right.
the places that they do go, there are not systems and programs there that will help them, whether they got to get their identity back or help them figure out a job situation, help them get clean. There's not a lot of programs like that here. I think that stuff should be implemented some sort of way. And the poverty-filled neighborhoods, they got to fix them and renovate them and make them look better. I mean, these people, if you go home to something that feels like trash, then you're gonna feel like you're trash. It's all like kind of like a psychological thing. And I think that our leaders, need to start showing that they want this community to be more equal. I think that this community does have the potential to be great, but until everybody can be great, it won't be.
Right. Okay. And then let's go to Dope Knife here for this last part of the question. And y'all, I just want to say it's tearing me up inside because some of the comments that we're seeing here, I mean, I if I could, I would spend another hour here because we've got questions about some of the park bench dividers. We're talking about how the perception needs to change. We're talking about
dividers.
Yeah, we're seeing Taylor's question about UJ property taxes. These are great conversations.
Make them they owe us.
So what we certainly know is that this conversation is not over. We're going to go here to Dope Knife, get to his question about public spaces, and then we're going to go through our closing questions. But as soon as we possibly can, I mean, we would love to be part of additional community conversations. We're just trying to figure out what form that'll take. So, Dope Knife, public spaces. What is it going to take? What do we need to do to reimagine public spaces in this community?
I mean, I really do agree with what Squale was saying, is that it's gonna like be people checking themselves and holding themselves accountable, because I mean, other than actually passing legislation, it's a cultural thing. Like the very culture has to change.
Right.
The way that people think and the way that people see things has to change. So I don't even know I wouldn't even say that it has to start there, because honestly, I feel like it needs to start legislatively.
Right.
I mean, you have to make sure that people who aren't with the program don't have the power to mess it up for everybody else who's trying to get this, is trying to have the equality and justice.
Yeah.
So I do believe that legislatively is the way to go, but at the end of the day, we do need to just become a more, it's gonna sound sappy, but we just have to become a more empathetic and caring society.
Right.
You know what I mean? We have to care about each other, and we have to look at a situation where it's if my neighbor over there is hurting,
right,
that means that our neighborhood is hurting. And if our neighborhood is hurting, then that means that our city's hurting, That's
right. Thank you so much for that. The idea of understanding the word neighbor and broadly applying it. Alex Sam said, listening to this dialogue is so helpful. We need more talking face to face. All sides need to talk. It filters out the misunderstandings. Great show today. So thank you, Alex.
Alex,
can I bring it all full circle?
Well, bring it full circle. Give me 1 second. I'll have you be our closeout person. You'll be our,
just that
yeah, sure. Shoot.
That was freestyle.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. Well, yeah, no, that's the idea. Is you got to bring it back to that initial thing.
Dome.
Okay. So they don't call you whack knife. All right. So I'm so sorry. This is why I'm not allowed in hip hop anymore. All right. So going to our last three closing questions. All right. We've had some very serious questions. The first of these is the lightest question we ask all of our guests, but it's still important. So if tomorrow you woke up and this was all over, every Athens business was open again, every park was open again, every movie theater was open again, social distancing wasn't necessary, we were in a post-COVID-19 world. I'm interested in how each of you would spend that day. So, Squale, can we go first with you?
Yeah,
You gotta do it in freestyle.
I gotta do it in freestyle.
A huge moviegoer, so I think the first thing I would do is
Yes.
go to the movies. I'm like having like withdrawals from like not being in a movie theater.
I want to go to the movie so bad. I
really
want to go to the movie so bad. Netflix ain't it.
Yeah. I want to go spend 4 times as much as I should be for candy.
No, let me spend 4 times as much as this work for some popcorn.
I'll even go like sit through a Marvel movie.
Telling you.
Yes. Yeah, it's yeah. Well, we'll all go to Cine when it's up. So that's great. Okay, so Squale, thank you for that. Mariah, what about you?
I would love to go dancing at church. That's my spot. I used to be up in there all the time. I'm not even gonna lie to you. They got
we should specify
behind the bar next to Stacey Abrams.
Yeah.
I just want to go dance at church.
Yes.
So bad.
And to clarify, church bar is what you're saying. Church bar. All right. And then Dope Knife, what about you?
I would probably like throw like a one-man show and just be on stage for like 7 hours straight and just like rap. Yeah, that's my favorite thing to do. That would be like I'm sitting down, just even talking about it.
I'm missing that. I'm missing that.
Gonna get to do.
So,
I mean, the live stream concert stuff is fun, but I like seeing people's faces when they hear lines in real time and talking to people.
So all right, so the 4 of us, this is an official agreement. When life gets back to normal, the 4 of us will open up a place called Bars Bar. And all it is the Bars Bar. And yeah, there we go. Let's just open up Bars Bar. All right. So you heard it here first. All right. Second to last question.
He's a rapper.
rapper. So when this is all over, we're likely not only going to be coming out of a pandemic, we're also likely going to be coming out of a recession. And when you come out of a recession, there's usually a lot of pent-up development pressure. People want to build things. That's not always a bad thing. Obviously, everything we try to preserve, someone had to build at some point. But one of the things that we as an organization are trying to prepare for is that can sometimes spiral out of control, and really important historic places can get endangered. So we've been asking each of our guests to kind of imagine 50 years in the future. Let's say some UGA student is watching this at the UGA library. They leave from the library. What are the places that should still be around? What are the historic places that you hope we protect? So, and that can take on any kind of place: music venue, space, neighborhood, cemetery, anything. I'll just throw it to whoever wants to go first on that one. Who would like to list some of their favorite historic places?
Y'all don't touch Little Kings. It better still be there.
Little Kings forever. Yes. Okay, Little Kings and the boat. The boat at Little Kings, the historic boat. All right, that's great. What else?
My favorite place to perform at is 40 Watt.
I was gonna say 40 Watt too.
So please leave 40 Watt alone. And my dance studio. Let's hope that's still up.
Historic. Hopefully, historic in 50 years.
Historic dance studio. All right, that's what's up. All right, what about you, Mariah?
I was also gonna say 40 Watt. That's a very meaningful place to me. Also, Athens Skate Inn out by the mall.
Yeah.
Yes, that's my spot. I actually went skating for the first time in like 4 months. Wednesday, and I had a mask on and nobody else did, and I got sketched out. Only took like an hour.
So you left.
I left. I was very scared. But I mean, it's such a historic. I feel like it's the beautiful mural, the disco ball, like the 70s music on Wednesday nights. I feel like it's an underrated establishment that needs to be preserved.
That's well, I was anticipating you somehow trying to preserve a historic skate location, so that's great. I only doing this for Marcus, but just because
Mars?
so here we'll just I'll show something funny here if it'll show up on screen. So everyone's faking it till they make it these days, and I've really been trying to emphasize that. We all have like this bookshelf makes it look like I'm in an office, but I like this is like the other bedroom in our house, and I've got all these books on the bed to try to make it at eye level, but it just so happened I thought y'all would get a kick out of this. So this was in high school. We had the first school charted freestyle rap club. And you can see, so it's freestylers. And let me see if I can, hold on. There's that guy. A little squad photo. Well, I just had to bring it up because that's Mr. Tay-Tay's room. So since we had the deep cut, I had hair and bars. I don't have either anymore. Anyway, so
hair and bars.
Hair and bars. All right,
your album.
So all right, closing question here. So 100 years from now, let's say someone's trying to figure out what life was like in Athens at this time. You have the chance to talk to them directly right now. What do you say to that person in the future generation? So what do you want them to know? So let me I'll go in just a random order here. So let's see. Let's do Dope Knife. You first. What would you want them to know?
It wasn't all of us. Some of us wore masks and stayed inside.
Oh,
when we could.
What?
Whatever you're going through, just know that there was a good amount of people that were fighting the fight. That needed to be fought.
That we're doing what we're supposed to do. Very good. Thank you so much. All right, Squale.
Life is what you make it. It's not about being black or white. It's about living within the gray. And that gray is truth and understanding and just being compassionate of everybody. We're all people.
Thank you very much for that. All right, Mariah.
So I had an interview recently in which I was asked something along the lines of like, why does it always come to this with regards to the protests happening? Or like, not why did it always, like, why has it come to this? Like, why is this happening? And I had to remind them that it always comes to this. Stonewall, the Montgomery bus boycotts, the sit-ins, all the way back to women's suffrage marching in the streets. It has always taken a mass mobilization of people that are completely fed up, who have been driven to the brink, coming together to push actual policy change forward and to push our society forward. So 100 years from now, when they're burning down the cyber Wendy's or whatever, and everyone's like, why is this happening again? And I just want to remind people in the future that this is how change always gets made. So don't be afraid, embrace it, because you're a part of a long legacy of change makers who have come together in the streets in that way.
Yeah, I just had to smile as you were saying it always comes to this. Obviously in recent years we've had the big Hamilton moment with the musical and whatnot, but I remember years ago reading Ron Chernow's biography on Hamilton, and he was in college as the Revolutionary War was approaching, and he specifically participated in a protest on, I think it was called King's College at the time, where they pulled down a giant statue. So it does seem like not that justice was secured in the revolution, but by any means, but just meaning that change doesn't ever seem to just occur by itself. People don't just wake up one day and suddenly go, so this isn't working, right? Let's just do this better.
People gotta get pushed to the brink, and it's happening again, and it'll happen again after this is over.
Right. Well, I can't thank y'all enough for spending the time with us that you have. Thank you for the work that you're doing. To the folks in the commenters, if you want to continue having access to conversations like this, I've seen a few folks have shared links to the podcast, Dope Knife and Mariah's podcast, and we appreciate y'all's leadership. Thanks for being our last conversation in this series. The four of us are going to go offline together, so stick with me. To everyone else out there that's been on this journey, if you're enjoying it, go back and watch the other video episodes. If not, look forward to July. We have something special up our sleeve for July, so just keep staying tuned into Historic Athens. Thank you very much. Be safe, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks a lot.